about our visit to the park, it is best not to ask them here. That's just going to slow down this lineup of cars trying to get in. Best bet is to head straight to the close by Kings Canyon Visitor Center, where rangers have got all kinds of time to help you out and make suggestions for your time in the parks. Immediately after passing through the entrance station, we'll have our first possible stop at Big Stump Grove. Many visitors just hurry right past the Big Stump Basin to get onto Grant Grove, but honestly, I recommend stopping here to get a strong sense of why these parks were created. At Big Stump, you won't just see one, but many stumps of giant sequoias felled around the turn of the last century during a major timber boom. And they are not just big, they are gargantuan. One of them, called the Mark Twain stump, was once 16 feet in diameter. Today, a staircase lets you stand on the top of it, which is big enough to host a dance party for you and a number of your friends and family. Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks were established in part to protect the remaining ancient sequoia groves from logging. Though the remains of these once mighty sequoias could be a little bit dump trail provide a pretty interesting look at how slowly sequoias decay, as stumps and even sawdust look like the loggers just left the area. If we'd like to stop, watch for the picnic area turn coming up on the left. The easy 2-mile loop trail passes by the Mark Twain stump, once one of the largest sequoias, which was felled so that sections of the trunk could be displayed in natural history museums as far away.
Okay. I don't know why.
history, many folks fervently believed in manifest destiny, the idea that the United States was destined to expand its dominion and spread both democracy and capitalism across North America. Ill-defined but keenly felt, manifest destiny strongly influenced investors all along an interpretive trail on the south side of Indian Basin Creek. Access is from the Princess Campground, coming up on the right, just after the bend. Now, this is not a must-do stop, but it is a nice, easy walk if we have lots of time. To see a sign coming up for Hume Lake. Now, I don't recommend taking it unless you are really wanting to go do some fishing right now. It isn't all that much of a sightseeing place. This area was logged extensively around the turn of the last century. The 87-acre Hume Lake Reservoir was built in well-known backpacking routes, traverses the entire length of the park from north to south. Another iconic hiking trail, the John Muir Trail, starts here in Kings Canyon at Mount Whitney and stretches 210 miles to Yosemite National Park. Speaking of Mount Whitney, did you know it is the tallest mountain in the lower 48 at 14,505 feet above sea level? And there are 11 more peaks over 14,000 feet along the eastern boundary of the park, along the crest of the Sierra Nevada. It is absolutely incredible how steep this landscape is. And super fun fact, Death Valley, the lowest point in the U.S., soon jumped the river and burned on both sides of the highway, reaching up near Cedar Grove. Started naturally by lightning strike, it took 99 days and more than 3,000 firefighters to contain this fire, and then another month before it was completely extinguished. At one point, the fire was growing over 10,000 acres each day. The Rough Fire is one of the largest Sierra Nevada wildfires in modern history, at over 151,000 acres burned. In fact, the fire was so large, it threatened 12 different giant sequoia groves. Have a look around. You can still see standing, scorched and dead trees. Of course, wildfire is a natural phenomenon around here, and sequoias actually need the heat of wildfires for their cones to open and drop seeds. But there's a line where very hot, intense fires can be more harmful than helpful. We won't know the full effects of the tell while driving around, but since we left Grant Grove Village, which is part of Kings Canyon National Park, we've either been in the Sequoia National Forest or the Giant Sequoia National Monument. All of these are federal entities, but all have different rules regarding preservation or use of our forests. Groves north of the Kings River are widely scattered and host fewer giant sequoias than groves found within and south of the Kings River watershed. While many sequoia groves are contained inside national park boundaries, most of the remaining giant sequoia groves are under the care of the U.S. Forest Service. It might surprise you to learn that logging permits are allowed in national forests. Harvesting of non-sequoia timber continued as recently as the 1980s, especially old-growth ponderosa. Favorite roadside viewpoint in all of Kings Canyon National Park is coming up. I stop here every time because the light is always changing, and thus so is the view. You can see quite a bit from this stop, including the confluence of the middle and south forks of the Kings River, but the first thing you'll notice is how impressively steep and deep this canyon really is. In fact, Kings Canyon is one of the deepest canyons in North America. The bottom of the canyon ranges from 4,000 to 8,000 feet below the surrounding topography, which means it's actually traveled up into the continental plate. At great depths, with immense heat and pressures, the addition of water causes rocks to melt. When that molten rock, or magma, rose up through the crust, that created a few volcanoes. But most of the magma hardened within the crust, not passing right through the top of it, and that formed the crystalline granites that we see today. In general, fresh exposures of granite have a salt and pepper look to them, with a combination of whitish materials like quartz and feldspar and some darker materials like biotite mica. Weathered granite tends to be more tanned colored and rounded in shape, like at Morro Rock on the coast. The story of overlook coming up, but I'm going to recommend we save this one for the return trip. All right, everyone, now is the time to stop distracting your driver. As we round this bend, you'll see why. The perch of the road can be a little bit intimidating. Around us, especially the rocks up ahead on either side of the canyon. This section has a mix of granite and older sedimentary rocks. The sedimentary rocks were marine deposits like mudstones, sandstones, and limestones, and they were already here when the granitic magmas intruded from below. The granitic magmas were so hot and contained fluids that seeped into the sedimentary rocks. The heat and fluids changed, or the technical term, metamorphosed the sedimentary rocks. Geologists call these patches of metamorphosed sedimentary rocks scattered through the Sierra Nevada granites roof pendants. That's because they were the rocks hanging down into the magma chamber filled with granitic magma. The roof pendant we're driving through used to be made up of shales, sandstones, and limestones. The shale metamorphosed to slate and schist, and the sandstones are now quartzites. All of these metamorphosed rocks are harder and more resistant to weathering than the original sedimentary rocks. But the metamorphosed limestone is the most striking, I'd say. The limestone, which is usually just a boring gray color, has transformed into a light gray to white marble with some beautiful blue streaks. This particular roof pendant is called the Boyden Cave Roof Pendant. Boyden Cave formed in the marble and is just a few miles ahead of us. I bet you can see the prominent light gray wall of rock ahead. That's the metamorphosed limestone I want you to notice. And this wall will just keep getting more and more dramatic and thus photogenic the closer we get. that direct sunlight results in higher temperatures and increased evaporation from soils, making those south-facing slopes both hotter and drier. But the north-facing slopes get far less direct sunlight, making them cooler. Because these north-facing slopes are cooler, they have less evaporation, so the soil retains more water. And as we've discussed, moist soil means plants. Can you tell that the north-facing slope that we're driving on is more heavily vegetated than slopes on the other side of the river? The vegetation can also help stabilize these slopes because their roots help hold soil and sediments in place. So, let's take a break to appreciate the role of aspect in this environment. That viewpoint is coming up on the left. This descriptively named bend is in the river and shows us the location of a thick bed of very hard quartzite. This dark reddish-brown quartzite is almost 3,600 feet thick and is rotated from its original flatline position to nearly vertical. And those towering gray cliffs up ahead? Yeah, those are the marble that used to be limestone. Boyden Cave is just around the bend and was formed within this marble. Friends, we've almost reached Boyden Cavern. This is a popular spot with 50-minute tours that run daily from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Now, because this spot is so popular, if you have not already booked tickets online, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, you may not get in. But if you're visiting at a less popular time of year, hey, maybe there's a chance you can walk up and get tickets. Now, if you do go, you'll want to bring a jacket. It gets cool in there, down to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. A short but really steep trail leads to the caves, and the inside of the cave is decorated with really cool formations. We're talking draperies, stalactites, and stalagmites. I bet you remember those from your school days. There's a couple of ways to remember this. The peaks of the letter M in stalagmites, picture those rising up from the ground. Or there's the G that also could be ground. The T in stalactites is like a tail dropping from the roof. Or, like I learned in school, the C is for ceiling. It's pretty common that a stalagmite has grown from the drippings of a stalactite above. Water filled with minerals drips down from the cave ceiling, depositing some of those minerals onto the stalactite hanging down. It's directly beneath the stalactite. All right, the turn for the cave is coming up on our right. Just watch for the sign for Boyden Cavern. Just past Boyden Cavern, we'll also have the opportunity to check out Windy Gulch Cascade. These humble roadside rapids might not be as impressive as the towering redwoods or rushing waterfalls found elsewhere in these parks, but they can still make for a pretty great photo op. Just watch for the rocky whitewater on our right shortly after we pass Boyden Cavern. The one person most closely associated with the southern Sierra Nevada National Parks is John Muir. Famous for his efforts to preserve wilderness in this area, Muir was a widely traveled naturalist and one of the most influential environmentalists the world has ever known. John Muir was essential to the creation of not just Sequoia and Kings Canyon, but Yosemite National Park too. So, how did a Scottish kid born in 1838 become such a giant in the world of American conservation? John Muir was born in Dunbar, Scotland, about 30 miles east of Edinburgh, the third of 8 children growing up in a strictly religious household. Always interested in the natural world, he spent much of his early childhood wandering the countryside and coastline around Dunbar. In 1849, when Muir was 11, his family emigrated to Wisconsin. By this point, he had learned to recite all of the New Testament and most of the Old Testament. In fact, Muir remained a deeply spiritual man throughout his life, and his sense of awe and sensitivity to beauty became synonymous with his notion of God. But his early Orthodox training and beliefs slowly faded after he left his family. Muir went on to college at the University of Wisconsin-Madison at the age of 22. He enrolled only in the courses he wanted to take, especially geology and botany, and then left for good after just a couple years. Records showed his class status as irregular gent. One can only imagine that Muir's quirky, eccentric nature had earned him a bit of a reputation. For the next 3 years after he left the university, he traveled and held a variety of jobs until he nearly lost his sight in a machinery accident at work in Indianapolis at age 28. When his vision returned after 6 weeks, he decided to be true to himself and follow his dream of exploration and study of plants. That's exactly what John did, among other things, until his death at age 76. In 2014, several bighorns were released into the Sequoia Kings Canyon area. I'm going to tell you more about that later. And bird watchers, you are in for a treat. There are more than 200 species of birds in this area during spring and fall migration. That really cool mountain south of Zuwalt Meadow, out the driver's side, that's called Grand Sentinel. The 8,504-foot peak looms 3,500 feet over the valley. The spires and ledges that give Grand Sentinel its look are the result of vertical and sloping cracks that cut through the granite. Across the valley from Grand Sentinel, the sheer face of North Dome was carved by valley glaciers. The top of the dome at 8,700. We're almost back to Roaring River Falls. Waterfalls are so common in these glaciated mountain valleys, and it's no coincidence. As we were discussing earlier, glaciers are the most erosive force on Earth. When glacier ice deeply erodes a valley, like how glaciers eroded this valley, it doesn't always happen as one straight trench. Ice gets left behind from the flow at higher elevations, forming tributary valleys that are literally left hanging far above the main valley floor. As those hanging valleys collect water, streams flow out of them, and in this case, the Roaring River. And sometimes we're lucky that the stream spills over the rock ledge as a beautiful waterfall. If you did not get a chance to see a living history presentation by one of the park rangers back at Road's End, let me tell you a little bit about canoyers. In 1880s, Pole, which was short for Napoleon, and Viola Canoyer settled here, and Pole experimented with copper placer mining in the South Fork of the Kings River, and that's how Copper Creek was named. Viola, also called Auntie Vi, was an excellent hunter, fisher, and cook, and she often invited travelers to stay. Naturalist John Muir often visited the canoyers when he was in. But I got here when I did. He did a lot of the work and deserves a whole lot of credit, but Muir did not act alone. Ansel Adams, yeah, you know that name, best known for his incredible black and white photography celebrating the natural world, was critical to the formation of these parks, especially Kings Canyon. He was also a Sierra Club member and nationally influential environmentalist who routinely lobbied for conservation efforts. The fight to protect Kings Canyon started with the creation of Sequoia and General Grant National Parks in 1890. Ooh, but the opposition was fierce. As we heard, the incredible steepness of the Kings River made it an attractive target for hydroelectric power. We'll talk more about that fight later on. By 1936, it was clear that the only way to prevent damming was to make this area a national park. The Sierra Kings Canyon National Park was established, but Hicks never did get his book back. For centuries, the California condor thrived here in the Sierra Nevada and across the western U.S. But by the 1960s, it was clear that the condor was in trouble. Lead poisoning, agricultural chemicals, habitat destruction, and poaching sent their population into a tailspin. And by captive breeding brought up their numbers, and strict protections meant that condors could be released into the wild by the early 1990s. As of 2022, there were 336 condors living in the wild, with over 200 of them nesting in California and more than 180 in captivity as additional breeding stock. Today, sadly, you won't find condors nesting in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks, but they do occasionally fly through the area. In 2014, 4 condors roosted on the railings of the Buck Rock Fire Tower near General Grant Village. It's noteworthy when condors are spotted flying over these parks. Keep your eyes on the skies, okay? California condors are uniformly black with a few patches of white on the underside of the wings. If you see one of these giant vultures, be sure to take photos and notify park rangers. Along this section of the road, we're driving through salt and pepper speckled granite rocks. But pretty soon we'll be back into the rocks of the roof pendant, including the marble that hosts Boyden Cavern. Now you may not expect it, but no less than 275 caves have been discovered in Sequoia Kings Canyon National Parks alone, including the longest cave in California, and all of them occur in this marble. Why do we have extensive caves in marble, but not in the other rocks around here? Well, first, these roof pendant rocks occur in many places throughout Sequoia Kings Canyon. The marble used to be limestone, but was changed to marble as the granitic magmas intruded into them roughly 100 million years ago. Marble and limestone are both made of calcium carbonate, which is easily dissolved by water. Naturally occurring fractures in the marble make great conduits for water, and the percolating water slowly dissolves the rocks, widening the passages into caves over time. Remember that in geology, whenever we talk about time, we mean long timelines, thousands and millions of years, not times correlated to our human lifetimes. Limestone caves are cool enough, but the marble caves in Sequoia Kings Canyon are spectacular. In fact, many folks think the caves here are interesting enough that they could have been the sole reason for establishing these two parks. The marble is usually banded blue and white, but it can be black and often contains interesting minerals like green malachite, blue azurite, and dogtooth spar. Scientific research in the caves has revealed nearly 20 unique cave-dwelling invertebrate species. The caves range from 1,500 feet in elevation to over 10,000 feet. The temperature inside the caves can range from just above freezing to more than 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And some caves have active stream systems running through them, while others are dry remnants of ancient water flow patterns. Oh yeah, there's so much to see. And if you want to see these marbles for yourself, remember that there are two publicly accessible options here. Boyden Cavern, which we'll be passing again shortly, and Crystal Cave in Sequoia National Park. Kings Canyon is steep, and the river has a lot of rapids. That, of course, makes it popular with kayakers. But the section through Horseshoe Bend, which is coming right up, has a bit of a reputation. It can about a true legend in these parts. His name was Norman Clyde. He was one of the most accomplished mountaineers in the High Sierra and beyond. He discovered these mountains during the 19-teens while he was in his mid-20s and set about summiting a great many of them. Clyde made the first ascent of at least 100. Time Clyde left, his pack weighed 95 pounds. By now, you've heard me mention Mount Whitney at least a few times. I mean, it is the tallest peak in the continental U.S. at 14,505 feet. It beats out the next tallest one, Colorado's Mount Elbert, by a good 66 feet. Mount Whitney sits on the border of Sequoia National Park and the Inyo National Forest, and it's the most frequently climbed summit in all of the Sierra Nevada. I suppose anybody who climbs wants to say they've hiked the tallest mountain around, right? Well, perhaps surprisingly, you don't need to be a skilled mountaineer to climb Whitney. I mean, it doesn't hurt, but you're not going to take some Sunday stroll to get up there either. The quote-unquote easy route is 22 miles round trip and gains more than 6,200 feet in elevation. That trail starts in the Inyo National Forest on the peak's east side, and many people do hike it in a single, very long, exhausting day. Now, if that sounds too easy for you, you could also hike the High Sierra Trail to get there. That route starts at the giant forest at Sequoia National Park and extends 60 miles to Mount Whitney. This peak is so popular that you actually need to apply for a lottery to get a permit to hike it from the east side. And I'm afraid your chances are not great. Less than 1/3 of people who apply get that lucky permit. Or maybe we could just take in the view of this mighty mountain. Unfortunately, you can't see it from these national parks. There are too many other tall mountains in the way. But if you head out east of Sequoia Kings Canyon on Highway 395 near the town of Lone Pine, you can get some pretty nice views on a clear day. Has been called Mount Whitney since 1864, when the crew of the California Geological Survey team named it after their leader, Josiah Whitney. And obviously, it's still Mount Whitney today, but a group of locals made a big effort to change it to Fisherman's Peak. It all started right after that survey team came through. One member of the team, Clarence King, tried to climb the summit twice, but failed. Undeterred, he came back again in 1871, and this time claimed the first known ascent of Mount Whitney. At least, that's what everyone thought, until it was discovered he'd actually climbed Mount Langley just to the southeast. Now, give the guy a break, it was a stormy day, and when he topped out, it was so cloudy he couldn't even see Mount Whitney looming nearby. Well, when King heard the news, he rushed back to climb the actual Mount Whitney, but a trio of local fishermen beat him to it, claiming the first recorded ascent in 1873. A group of locals thought Fisherman's Peak had a nice ring to it and pushed to change the name. Well, it went as far as the governor's desk, but never made it into law. I don't know, what do you think? Team Whitney or Team Fisherman's Peak? So I wanted to remind you that this stop has a good view with some good parking on the right. Time for another selfie or photo of this incredible shelf road? I'll leave that up to you. We've been able to go on a hike or two. Turnout with a view is coming up on the right. It's Junction View Overlook. Maybe we stopped here before to admire the view, but this vantage point changes so much with the position of the sun, we could probably stop again and love it. If we didn't stop yet, well, what are we waiting for? Let's do it. 20 minutes back to Grant Grove Village with only a few great views and hardly any stops. So I'm going to tell a few longer stories through this upcoming stretch. If you need a bathroom break before we make it to Grant Grove Village, the Princess Campground about 8 minutes ahead is your best bet. I'll let you know when we're getting close. The Taxodiaceae. This family, which includes cypress, cedars, and junipers, is widespread all over the world. This is a long-lived botanical family as well, with fossils found in rocks as old as 200 million years. Most of the botanical family members are just normal-sized trees, so question raises, why are the redwoods and sequoias so huge? One of the primary reasons is water. Both redwoods and sequoias are located in environments where they get a lot of water. Now, it could be hard to envision if you're visiting in the summer, but the elevations where we find giant sequoias, like along this stretch back to Grant Grove Village, can have surprisingly deep snow in winter. When that snowpack melts slowly in the summer, huge amounts of water seep into the ground, providing water to the roots of sequoias. If we've already been through Sequoia National Park, we learned that most of California has a xeric or Mediterranean climate, characterized by dry, hot summers and cool, wet winters. As the name implies, coast redwoods are found along the coast of Northern California, as well as into Southern Oregon. Elevations along the coast are far too low for significant winter snow. So, where do coast redwoods get their moisture during the dry summer? Believe it or not, coast redwoods get much of their water from fog. Yeah, coastal summer fog can be super dense, in fact containing more water than even a downpour of rain. The trees and steep terrain along the coast both can hold the fog in place, and coast redwoods can actually consume the water in fog through their leaves. Scientists In 1976, UNESCO designated Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks a biosphere reserve. Because of the wide range of elevations from 1,500 feet to 14,500 feet above sea level, the parks are home to roughly 200 bird species and 1,200 plant species. That's 20% of all the plant species in California. The ecosystems in these parks are considered intact, with the exception that they no longer support two top predators, the wolf and the grizzly bear. Other biosphere reserves in the U.S. include Yellowstone Grand Teton, Denali, and the Hawaiian Islands. So, not bad company, right? UNESCO describes biosphere reserves as learning places for sustainable development. Basically, that means they are great places for testing out solutions to changing conditions and figuring out how people and the rest of the ecosystem can best get along sustainably. Tiny sequoia cones rely on fire to dry them out so they can open and release their seeds. Those cones can wait up to 25 years for a fire to do that. Fire loosens the soil and helps to reduce competing species and brush so that new seedlings have all the light and moisture to themselves. Using fire scars on tree rings, scientists have shown that surface fires have been frequent over the last 2,000 years. All that changed around 1860 when fire frequency declined sharply. There were three major factors. First, Native Americans who had been burning undergrowth in a controlled fashion started leaving as Europeans moved in around the mid-1800s. Then, intensive sheep grazing removed the vegetation that carries ground fire beneath the trees. Once the parks were established, the federal government policy was to suppress any fires. Policies allowed a lot of fuel to build up on the forest floor. Results of fire suppression, young sequoias were not able to get established for about 100 years. Probably more important for the overall health of sequoia groves, fires changed from fast-spreading and quickly extinguished surface fires to super hot, high-severity crown-burning fires. Climate change will likely increase the occurrence of fire in these ecosystems, even with ongoing forest management practices like controlled burns of undergrowth. Close to Redwood Mountain, home of the Redwood Mountain Grove. That is the largest grove of giant sequoias in all the world. Even though it was partially logged, it still has more old growth than any other sequoia grove and boasts the tallest known giant sequoia. The old trees are spread farther apart here. That means it's a little bit less dramatic than the giant forest. But on the upside, there are far fewer visitors here. In fact, on a busy holiday weekend in Sequoia National Park, there's a good chance you might not even see other hikers. In 2021, the Redwood Mountain Grove burned in the KNP complex fire. About 23% of it burned at high intensity. At that intensity, scientists predict that about 75% of the sequoias will die. Now, remember that low-intensity fires are critical to maintain the good health of sequoia groves. A 1963 experimental burn in the Redwood Mountain Grove was the first fire in any of the park's sequoia groves in 75 years. It's an unusual, pure, giant sequoia grove on the top of Redwood Mountain. This stretch of trail is particularly photogenic in the late afternoon as well as sunset. If you're staying in the parks for a few days, you might consider an all-day loop hike combining the Heart Tree Trail and the Sugar Bowl Trail. We'll reach that overlook soon on our left, okay? Then the Buena Vista Peak Trailhead is just a little further around the bend. Mostly in the form of snow. They like moist, well-drained soils. Elevations lower than about 5,000 feet, that gets a little bit too dry for these giants, but any higher and severe winter low temperatures would limit their growth. You might just say we're driving through the sequoia's Goldilocks zone. That's where the temperatures and soil moisture conditions are just right. Year 2000, President Clinton established Giant Sequoia National Monument, which protects 33 giant sequoia groves in the area around General Grant Grove and in a much larger area south of Sequoia National Park. domes are very common in the Sierra Nevada. You're in Sequoia National Park. If we've already been through Kings Canyon, you've already heard me talk about him quite a bit. Muir was also known as John of the Mountains and Father of the National Parks. He was an influential Scottish-American naturalist, author, environmental philosopher, botanist, zoologist, glaciologist, and early advocate for the preservation of wilderness in the United States of America. But Muir never finished college. In fact, he didn't even see the Sierras until he was 30 and only started writing and studying Sierra Nevada ecosystems at 36. After living and exploring in Yosemite for only 3 years, John Muir had many ideas about Sierra Nevada geologists of the day who agreed with Muir that the landscape was carved by glaciers. We now know that Agassiz and Muir were right. Muir was the first to systematically study giant sequoias, and in the process, he helped establish the new science of ecology. Ecology studies the interrelationship of species in an area, as well as their relationship to non-living factors like climate, elevation, and geology. In 18 during the busy summer season, Lost Grove is one of roughly 73 sequoia groves scattered between 4,500 and 7,000 feet on the western slopes of the Sierra Nevada, and used to be a park entrance station. Most of the sequoias here are visible from the parking pullout, so there's not a whole lot of hiking required. Walking through a grove of giant sequoias can feel as awe-inspiring as touring one of Europe's great Gothic cathedrals. But the beauty and age of these forests is not the only awe-inspiring aspect. A walk in any forest, but especially an old-growth sequoia grove, is a walk through a vast carbon bank. Plants use photosynthesis to make their parts, like bark, leaves, branches, roots, all the rest of it. Photosynthesis uses the energy of the sun to national parks. Now that said, it usually fills up pretty fast. I don't want to discourage you from stopping because the trail to the Muir Grove of giant sequoias begins here. With many choices of groves to visit, why do we care about the Muir Grove Trail? Well, because most people don't even know about it. That means it has far fewer visitors than the more tame them. During the KNP fire, firefighting crews did their best to protect the giant trees from high-intensity fire. Planes dropped water and fire-retardant chemicals directly on the blaze, and bulldozers plowed out wide fire breaks or areas without any fuel to burn. Fire crews even wrapped the bases of sequoias in a fire-resistant material and coated them with fire. Didn't come into existence until 1916. For the first 12 years, the park was patrolled in the summer by U.S. cavalry troops out of San Francisco. And in 1903, the San Francisco cavalry troops were replaced by Buffalo soldiers under Captain Charles Young. Young was only the third black West Point graduate. The segregated Buffalo soldiers were all black regiments from the South, notable for the lowest rates of desertion. Captain Young showed impressive leadership through his initiatives in Sequoia National Park and shaped the role of the modern-day park ranger, recognizing necessary conservation efforts. He green-lighted the dedication of sequoias as a means of promoting their preservation. One example is the tree dedicated to Booker T. Washington. Young increased troop patrols around heavily trafficked areas. He was among the first to realize that compaction was a problem for the sequoia groves and built the first fences around General Sherman. He directed his troops to develop the first trail to the summit of Mount Whitney. Army Pass and Soldier Lake are named for the cavalry's work in the area. Now you know why. Captain Charles Young had an outsized impact on Sequoia and other national parks. And yes, he does have a sequoia in the park named in his honor too. Earlier, I told you about the Sequoia Goldilocks zone, but there was one important factor I didn't mention. I told you that sequoias like moist, well-drained. Another reason you won't find sequoias much higher than 7,000 feet is the glacier effect. Like giant natural bulldozers, they scrape all the soil off the underlying rocks and even scrape up the rocks themselves. It can take thousands of years for soils to form. There just hasn't been enough time since the last glaciers to build the soils and the soil thickness that by now I'm sure you've noticed the many meadows up here on the plateau. They look like flat grassy areas that often have wildflowers, but curiously no trees. We learned that sequoias need thick, moist soil. So why aren't sequoias growing in these meadows? Well, it turns out that these meadows, warmer and drier, these meadows are at risk of drying out. Other trees, mostly lodgepole pines, can then encroach on the meadows, further drying them out. About 7 miles from here is the Giant Forest Village complex, which is very close to the General Sherman tree. That's the largest of the giant sequoias. In the 1920s, the Giant Forest Village contained many buildings and lots of visitors, and over the years, it became increasingly obvious that extreme visitation was negatively impacting the sequoia growth, called for the village to be removed. Historical preservationists cited the historical importance of the buildings and opposed the scientists for almost 50 years until demolition began in 1997. During the fight, the park proposed a new village in 1971 and chose a site that's coming up soon. Work began on Waxahachie Village in 1985, starting with employee housing. That makes up the majority of the Sierra Nevada was emplaced about 100 million years ago. That metamorphism caused recrystallization of the calcite in the limestone and also led to the formation of pretty new minerals like azurite. The caves in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks expose the beautiful banded marble, and many naturally occurring cave features like stalactites and stalagmites, curtains, and flowstone sculptures. Crystal Cave is really something to see. Well worth it to take the ranger-led tour, which is the only way that you can get inside. Millions of people have visited since Crystal Cave opened in 1941. The thing is, you needed to buy tickets for the tour online at least